Thanks to Caitlin, Ron, and the whole iConnections team for getting us all here to Miami this week. So let's get to it. For those that don't know me real quick, Adam Friedman, been at CAA, talent agency based in LA for the last 14 years or so. And for the last 5 or 6 years, helped lead a joint venture we put in place with NEA, Connect Ventures. And we've wound that down and are now out with a proper venture fund, still Connect Ventures, and separately work with our clients on a lot of the entrepreneurial stuff we do. And specifically talking about entrepreneurial stuff, I think there's not necessarily something more than that right now in the world of sports than emerging sports and leagues. So we co-led the Seed and Series A in Tiger and Rory's Tomorrow Sports, which launched TGL, plays just down the road actually at the SoFi Center in Palm Beach. And Mark Lasry, who is not Brent, but whose Avenue Sports owns the Bay Golf Club in TGL, was snowed in and couldn't make it for either tonight's match against the New York Golf Club or for this panel. But we have a great panel nonetheless. With Brent pinch hitting here, we've now expanded the topic as well to sort of cover the impact of content in and around sports. But let's start with Jordan. So Jordan Rose, who's here, who's also representing her son Logan, who unfortunately couldn't make it either. One of the most well-respected, successful lawyers around, not just in sports, but beyond. Minority owner of the Arizona Diamondbacks, also an owner of TGL's newest expansion team, Motor City Golf Club. So Jordan, what got you excited about TGL, and what sort of continues to get you excited about emerging sports?
Well, on the TGL front, we actually just went yesterday to check it out. And if you haven't been, you've got to see it in person. It's just really amazing. I think in all of these emerging sports that we've seen, the short form content that they can produce is just is really engaging. And in TGL, with the players and the mic'd up that they've been doing and all the improvements that they've been doing has really escalated, I think, the viewership. TGL was a great concept, and I think the way they've iterated on it over the last year has been phenomenal. Our club, Motor City Golf Club for Detroit, is going to be online next season, so we're excited about that.
Yeah, no, that was great. I mean, the league started with 6 teams. Why Motor City Golf Club? Why Detroit? Why getting involved now? Why do you think it's a good time?
I mean, I think the valuations on TGL teams have escalated. I think they're now, there's some offers out there for in $100 million range, and that's in a very short period of time. The level of talent that the TGL has taken in, everybody wants to play there. It's fun for the guys. So we had a relationship with the Hemp family, that's the majority owner. They also own the Detroit Lions football team, and they know what they're doing and operating. And I think that's why we were chosen to take on the expansion team. There was a really competitive bid process. I feel like there was 16 or 18 groups that came in for it, so we feel really lucky about that.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. Well, let's shift to Brent. So Brent Montgomery started Pawn Stars years ago and built an unscripted TV powerhouse that sold to ITV and today runs Wheelhouse. Tell us a little bit about Wheelhouse.
So it's basically an investing platform into the sports and entertainment ecosystem. When you think of what just happened with the Olympics, you saw the energy around the big sports, but then you get these great human interest stories 5 minutes before you're watching and loving curling or whatever other sports. So, we really look to tell athlete stories or team stories. And that puts us at the intersection of producing a lot of shows for Netflix, Amazon. We've done, just to name check a few, the Dallas Cowboys cheerleader show for Netflix, which we include as sports. NIL story on LSU the year that they had Jaden Daniels, Libby Dunn, and Angel Reese in their ecosystem down there at LSU. And then we have a show called King of Collectibles that we do with Peyton Manning on a company called Golden Auctions. So it's a good case study for our overall business model, which is try to invest in the people, businesses, and brands, and then use our storytelling, different companies across Wheelhouse to go out and amplify the underlying investment and tell the story to a bigger audience.
So you talk about people and IP and brands. I think it's sort of become really clear if you look at sport and athletes and power of the brand of those folks, right, has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And in some cases, the individuals have bigger brands, right, than the leagues or the teams. How does that play into content?
So I think if you were a league, like the Wiffle Ball League, Jordan and I were talking about before, they recently announced a TV deal. TV deals drive so much of the value of these sports leagues and franchises. And now with the proliferation of streaming, broadcast, linear cable, and then YouTube, which more minutes are consumed on YouTube than anywhere else, certainly by children. And so you look at where's the story to be told. Last year, we announced a partnership that's broader than just one show with Anthony Edwards, the NBA All-Star MVP this year. And basically, we started the partnership in November, so the chance of getting a lot of his time wasn't going to really be a possibility until the offseason. So we convinced him to do a show that's similar to a Drive or Survive or a quarterback or the golf show, where we embedded with him. So we didn't take him out of his regular course. We just had, literally one person with him throughout that journey and told that story on YouTube. And so in that case, we call that like a self-green light. A lot of times it's hard to sell a TV show, but if you can green light it on YouTube and get brands to pay for it, that's a new path that I think a lot of athletes are looking at, and some teams are trying to build out their YouTube channels as well.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And when you think about sort of YouTube content getting out there without needing to sell the show, one of the things that obviously is key, and you touched on media rights, right, when it comes to emerging sports and team valuations and all of these things. And we'll get to sort of the stats in a second. But media rights, in many cases, that deal, right, is the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow for a lot of these emerging teams and leagues. However, right, if you look at the ability to self-distribute, it's taken a back seat to being the number one priority, right, and sort of building and sort of almost thinking about it as CapEx. Take something like Kings League, right, Gerard Piqué's sort of YouTube-born soccer league. Left Lane Capital is a big investor. Alignment, who I know you know well, is a big investor. I think Blitzer and Bolt just came in. The biggest YouTubers in the world own soccer teams as part of these leagues, or as part of the league, and they distribute those matches on their own channels. So the reach is massive, right? And I think Big League Wiffle Ball, right, started a bit like that as well. So we'll get into the Big League Wiffle Ball story, but talk a little bit about self-distribution and what YouTube sort of is allowing for in that.
Yeah, I think it does kind of tie right into the story. So my son, Logan, he's 19. He's not here because he had to make a choice. And I don't know how many of you guys are parents in the audience, but I'm his mom. And he calls me, he's at SMU, going to school for sports management. It's his first year. And he said, hey, Mom, he just got awarded Forbes 30 Under 30 award at 19. And he said, I went to my professor to come to this today. And the professor said, if you take this day off and the Forbes 30 day off, I'm going to lower your grade by one letter. And he was like, what do I do? And as a mom, I'm like, I don't know what to say. So anyhow, he's not here, but he values his education. So what happened was during COVID, my kids were doing what all kids were doing, school online and board and this and that. And I said to the kids, hey, look, you have two choices in travesty, in chaos. You either go down with the chaos or you use that to kind of create great things. And look at all the great things that have been created in history when somebody's got personal chaos or global chaos. And so Logan looks outside, and the next thing I know, he builds a wiffle ball field. And then there's kids coming over to play on the wiffle ball field. And then he's making merchandise, and then he's posting it on YouTube. And people are watching, and it's like getting a following. And then the next thing I know, he's 13. he calls Scottsdale Stadium. We live in Scottsdale, Arizona, where the spring training is going on. So he calls where the Giants play spring training.
At 13.
And he rents it. Yeah, hey, Mom, I rented Scottsdale Stadium for a national wiffle ball tournament. And I'm like, what the? Okay, let's do this. So people came, like from all over the country. And so he started doing it. And every year he was doing it at all these spring training sites. And then last year he decided he was going to do like a test case and sell franchises, sell teams to professional owners. And so he did that, and it was successful. The Dallas Cowboys called him out of the blue. They saw him on YouTube and the distribution and said, we want you to have your World Series here at AT&T Stadium. So there we go. So we're off, and we went to AT&T Stadium, had the thing, and it was pretty amazing. We did some urban implementations where we played wiffle ball in the city. We did some other spring training implementations. And so this year, he decided to sell to really big players. So we have some of the owners are here in the audience today. We've got David Blitzer, Mark Lasry, David Adelman, Gary V., Dude Perfect. They're my partner and my team, the Dallas Pandas, along with Trevor Short and Blaine Boyer. I've got Dan Fleischman's an owner, Casey Thompson. Who else? Well, who else wants a team? But they paid real money for this opportunity, and so we've just been blowing it up, and just I got through doing an implementation with Dude Perfect the other day, and doing a Dallas tournament, and he's been doing tournaments around the country. And then we'll culminate on March 24th. If anybody wants to come out to Scottsdale, we're going to be the last spring training game of the Major League Baseball season. We're going to play right after that Tigers-Rockies game. But YouTube is the reason. Sorry, long story.
No, listen, very impressive. At 13, I was running around to bar mitzvahs and playing video games. So that's, yeah.
He's amazing. Yeah. I'm kind of proud. And I'm like his corporate counsel, because I have a big law firm, and that's what I do. So I'm also his assistant, his investor, and his mom. So.
Does he pay full freight?
Yeah, no. Yeah, he's got a deal. He had a deal. He's got the family deal at my law firm.
Good.
Yeah, so that's hugely positive, because those corporate documents for for sports leagues are big. So.
When you were talking, and Logan was talking to folks like Lasry and Blitzer and others who have investments obviously in the traditional sports leagues, as you do as well, but then also a bunch of the emerging sports leagues, in some cases that are somewhat tied to an existing league like a TGL. What got them excited about wiffle ball?
I think the relatability. I mean, how many, at least if you're a male born in America, you probably have a story for me, like, oh, I played wiffle ball with my dad or with the kid down the street. And so it's just so relatable, and everybody's got that. And then there's just such a low barrier to entry to play, which is amazing. With pickleball, which is a great model for us, there's all sorts of equipment. You got to have a court. You got to time the whole deal. And with wiffle ball, it was just the idea that you could dive right in and go for it. And then there's so much talent out there, major league players that have retired, minor league, whatever, college players. They're throwing the ball like 110 miles an hour. And when you look at it on video, I think that's what really got them excited. The short form video content of these balls doing like crazy things at 110 miles an hour is like, you can't beat that. I mean, you've probably seen it on YouTube. It's kind of amazing.
So you guys have both looked at, I know, a bunch of different emerging sports teams and leagues. And I would imagine that you're looking at it from similar but also slightly different angles. Brent sort of thinking about, okay, how are we creating and exploiting content around these teams and leagues? Which of the ones that have you've seen that has been most exciting to you from a sport perspective that's out there?
Well, by the way, I think yours, Jordan and Logan's, is super exciting. I remember starting to see the clips online, and I really go to my kids now to find out what we should be pitching as TV shows. And when we were doing our show with Anthony Edwards, we had this young guy named Jesser on the show. And Jesser, who 99% of the people in the room probably wouldn't recognize, including myself, is the biggest creator around NBA.
He walked up with Adam Silver at the Tech Summit on Friday morning last week at All-Star, and basically opened it up with him.
So that immediately set us on trying to get into business with Jesser about a year ago, and so now we've got a project coming out with him. But my daughters spotted these father-daughter Jordan and Salish Matter, and now Salish, as my daughters remind me every day, has a higher, I don't know what they call it, but it's like famous people's birthday, than Taylor Swift, which is they were very excited when I got to meet these people and talk to them about doing television. And it goes back to, like, I use the best product I've seen on a sports field, probably in the last 5 years, was the Savannah Bananas. And I think wiffle ball has that same sort of fun, you know, like you said, low bar for entry, but every kid has probably played it once and if you haven't seen it, the curve balls are just absolutely insane.
Let's talk golf for a second. So obviously there's TGL from an emerging sports and leagues perspective, but talk about the creator business specifically. So, you know, I spent half my time at CAA, and, you know, obviously we represent traditional talent, athletes, musicians, et cetera. Over the course of the last couple years, the creator space has boomed, right? Representing folks like Jesser, Ninja, others sort of just that, you know, break the internet, and, you know, effectively print money in some situations. When you think about sort of, you know, take golf, right, and the creator sort of leagues that are out there, what do you think about the importance of directly reaching the fan, and how creators are actually integrating into the sport?
Well, I mean, COVID was the best thing I think that ever happened to golf, or maybe if you're trying to get a tee time, people would argue. But between what you guys launched and built during COVID, when you simply couldn't have people in the same room, certainly the fact that people were forced to be outdoors 5 times more helped. But then YouTube, I think YouTube has made golf so fun, so accessible. We invested in something called Good Golf, which is one of the top golf channels. Bryson DeChambeau. I think if you look back at how athletes have reshaped their image, whether it's going on, Alex Rodriguez going on to Fox after he retired, or Tony Romo, or Bryson, I think athletes are loving the fact that, yes, they have to, get on stage after, do the press conference, but then they really want to go somewhere else to tell their story and not have a middleman. Derek Jeter started doing that a long time ago, LeBron James. And, athletes now are wanting to do that at the top of their career because they understand that if we can launch IP content on YouTube with them, we just signed another big CA star, and are having another very prominent political figure come into this new partnership, and he's 23, this athlete, and he wants to be telling that story, and that will just drive the underlying value of whatever he's in. Right now, nobody can tell him that he can't be holding whatever he wants to hold in our shows and videos. So we see content, historically we've created IP, sold it to Netflix, it's a work for hire, and now we're able on this end to go create the IP, find the same, funny people that we would put on TV, but put them right there and own a piece of the underlying business. And I think it's that merging for you as well, right? With Wiffle Ball, the first TV deal will look one way, and then hopefully the second and third will look completely different. And we invested in the PLL right around when they were, doing their ESPN deal, which that gave us a lot of confidence that it would help drive value.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned sort of deals looking, like one thing to another in a span of sort of not too long of time. I mean, let's, use the example even of the NWSL, right? Launched, in 2020, went from $1.5 million a year in media rights value to, I think it was about $60 million in the last deal, right? Or the WNBA, I think 3xing its media rights revenue from the last deal. Obviously, women's basketball, women's soccer are not emerging sports by any means, but when you think about sort of where they are in the media rights sort of spectrum, right? I would say it was almost tied to what sort of would have been an emerging sport and now sort of graduating. I know you spent a lot of time in the space, if you want to talk a little about that.
Well, I think that's so interesting because we were just looking at the women's softball deal, right, which Major League Baseball is invested in, to try to comp that out to, what did they do when they first got on ESPN to now their deal on ESPN, and the lift, and why does that lift occur? And I think it does happen with all these, like, you have kind of independent operators with all of the players who want to be great. They want to be famous and all of these things. So you sort of have lots of people working, to lift your brand up, where you didn't used to have that, which is cool, and they can get paid from it, which is a huge positive. I think I forgot to mention Kevin Costner owns one of the teams. I failed to mention that. That's kind of a big deal. And so he's come out and done, he did Field of Dreams after one of our tournaments and stayed for the, his production. And I think that, the wiffle ball players are looking up to him as, like, here's a standard of excellence in, getting your name out and being famous, and seeing what they can do to kind of live up to that dream and make him proud, which is kind of cool to see.
That is cool.
Yeah.
Some stats here. The total value of sports media rights recently topped about $60 billion annually. And today, streamers are spending about $14 billion of that 60. You're talking to buyers, Brent, all the time, right? At Netflix, Amazon, et cetera. As the streamers are getting more and more into this business, and as Netflix went from saying we're never going to put ads to now having a very robust ad business, how do you think that drives, honestly, the creation of more of these sort of leagues, teams, and properties that candidly there's only so much that can be live, right?
Yeah, I think that's driven the sports value, which the sports ecosystem is that it's the last real live programming that's out there, other than news, but most people don't watch news now in the traditional way. So we've just seen that competition drive everything, because if you think back to, like, the broadcast model, they would premiere their fall lineup in September. It would line up beautifully with their NFL packages, and they were just tied together. In some cases, being a loss leader for the entire channel. So when the streamers came in, Apple and Amazon and Netflix, it's just like another incredible place for the big four sports to go hunting, and creates some holes where they were as well. And then also, to be able, like, in some cases, I think YouTube is the only place to start, because as somebody who's been in the entertainment business for a long time, we were always taught, if it's a feature, that first weekend, it's all about those 3 days. You'll know whether or not the movie's going to make it big or tank. And then in television, we would generally know whether we were going to get a pickup for season 2 after 3 weeks. Now everything gets dropped all over the place. You're not watching the same shows at the same time as your friends. So you're asking your friends, what should I watch? But sports is it. Sports is the last thing. I think because people are online so much, I haven't looked at the numbers from the hockey match, but I'm sure the tune-in, it was early here, I'm sure it went up dramatically, by the time it went into overtime. And now you're seeing, 99% of the Americans probably don't even know the guys' names, and now they know their families, their stories, all the cool stuff that was popping up Sunday after the game.
Yeah, no, there's no question about that. Talk about collectibles. You mentioned Golden, and I think you guys have a show with Peyton Manning. Obviously, we've seen just over the course of the last couple of years what Ruben and Fanatics is doing in that space, and a lot of the content that's being created around it. They just launched Fanatics Studios with our buddies at OBB that you know. How does collectibles and that whole culture play into sport?
Well, I was like Logan, just not successful like Logan. At 13, 14, I started a baseball card business. And I only had one advantage against the other guys who were the adults at these trade car shows, and I had more time than they did during the summer. So I was able to research down into the minor leagues, who was doing well and who wasn't. And fortunate that my dad would drive me to these trade shows. And so through that, I just, I loved baseball first. I loved, being able to go with my dad and try to get autographs and do all that stuff. And my brother, he was always behind me. But that became a business, and then sort of the world moved on. They were just printing way too many cards, devalued the cards, and so nowadays the era that I was straight in certainly isn't worth much except for in basketball and football. But that was sort of put to the side. I always wanted to be in and around the collectible space, and then I created Pawn Stars about 15 years ago. And our goal there was to make it as broad a show as possible, highlight all these different things. And so coming out of that show, we did a lot of other shows about stuff. And then we started Wheelhouse in 2018, and I got a call during COVID. Some bigger friends were investing in this thing called Golden Auctions, which is part now of Collectors Universe. Which is Steve Cohen, the Churning Group, and a bunch of Peyton Manning, a bunch of athletes. This guy Ken Golden's a character. He is in Philly or outside Philly, and he's been doing this since he was probably in his early 20s. He would sign athletes to their first ever autograph exclusive window, and then he would, in some cases, give them $1 million recoupable signing bonus before they got their on-field, on-court contract. So anyway, long story short, we got with Peyton Manning, we took the project out, we sold it to Netflix, and we had invested in that business, which got me even more excited about this ecosystem. And then I've been friends with Alexis Ohanian, mostly famous for marrying Serena, but also for co-founding Reddit. And he was very much in this space and a very big first mover in female sports and also female collectibles. And so he and I started something called Mantle. We really like this as an alternative asset class to be looked at as more professional than it is right now, but it's catching steam. And so Mantle was meant to be half Reddit, half the Ringer or the Wheelhouse part, like premium content. So last year we did what we called the Hobby Awards. Sorry, I'm giving you a long answer. We're just very excited about the Hobby Awards. We brought Gary Vee and a bunch of other, sort of celebrities in the space in, and we're able to do the first award show, which we're hoping to pump up this year and do, hopefully get it on YouTube and a TV show later.
Very nice. I don't know how much time we have left here, if there's a clock anywhere, but sports betting. I know you do a lot in the space from a legal perspective, lobbying perspective, et cetera. Similar to live content, right? And media rights and dollars flowing in. Sports betting is obviously key. How does that impact, as you look at investing in, advising these businesses, which ones that you take on, which ones that you want to get involved with, and just generally, what's your take on that space and sort of the convergence with emerging sports? Obviously, it's had a big role in, the major sports leagues for some time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great possibility for revenues that these emerging sports are going to figure out how to capture. You see, some of the leagues right now are being paid for their information by the sports betting group, and that's how they're making money. Some groups are taking pieces of the sports betting itself, and how those things converge with the emerging sports is going to be fascinating. I just think there's a multitude of ways that you can structure a deal to make that work. And I think if you're not thinking about sports betting in your emerging sport, then you're not thinking about a huge possible revenue stream, and that would be a big miss, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think as sports have grown, betting has grown, and we are in and around it in different ways. Some of these YouTubers that we're trying to now invest and acquire these actual channels. So some big ones that we're talking to just, I think, tripled their sports gambling annual compensation for customer acquisition, and they're able. These big DraftKings and FanDuels are able to really articulate customer acquisition in a way that gets very granular for talent, which they like transparency when they believe that you're building your business on their backs. So it's pretty exciting to see it through that as these things grow sort of in unison together.
All right, well, I'm getting the wrap us up sign. So thank you, Jordan, Brent.
Thank you.
Thank you all. and enjoy the rest of Miami.